Welcome to the Inner Athlete Podcast, where we help young athletes, parents, and coaches build strong, resilient, and high-performing athletes for sport and life. I'm Trent head strength conditioning coach and founder of Inner Athlete. Each episode, we break down the training, mindset, and habits that actually matter, from strength and speed development to injury prevention, confidence, and long-term athletic growth. Whether you're a parent trying to support your child or an athlete chasing their potential, you're in the right place. Let's get into today's episode. Welcome back to the Inner Athlete Podcast. I've got another guest here with me today. I've got Laura from LS Nutrition. First of all, thanks for coming down.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Speak a little bit more to the microphone. Yeah. Thank you very much. Just to let you guys know who Laura is. She is a qualified clinical nutritionist with over 15 years experience in the health and wellbeing industry. But the reason why I got her on is more in terms of the gut health, the mental health, and the hormones and the supports needed for teens and adults to feel energized, focused, and resilient. And that's why you're actually here today. Even though we've had other nutritionists come on, I always find it's beneficial to get a multitude, to actually get like a general consensus. Yeah. And then everyone's going to be able to have their own little lane that they kind of sit in with specific areas as well. We've had another nutritionist on board with Angeline, where she was more focused on the sports nutrition side, which is good. And now you're focused on a little bit more on the clinical side. So, if someone's not functioning very well, why is that? And asking more questions and be able to probe down from that side. And then obviously your goal is to help create nutritionally balanced but realistic eating habits and healthy relationship with food.
Yeah. So I got into nutrition after a lot of my own gut health and hormone struggles from a teenager. And so it's one of the things that I love, supporting teens and adults who are experiencing maybe some gut health issues, hormone issues, or mental health issues, or generally all three, and looking at how we can use food as medicine and optimal functioning of the body itself more long term. So that's sort of where I come from as a clinical nutritionist.
Yeah, I think it's kind of coming around now. People are looking towards more food to solve their problems more so, rather than just go down like antibiotics or just get surgery or whatever it may be. That food is part of that healing process. And you look at like a lot of Eastern medicine, food is a part of the healing side. Huge part. And we can potentially prevent needing other certain medications and things down the line if we focus on food first. Preventative. And you also look at a lot of different demographics, where you look at the Japanese, the Chinese, you look at it like the Europeans, the Mediterranean style of what the foods that they consume, and you look at that lifespan and the longevity side. Yeah, food can be wonderfully healing, obviously, if it's the right thing for us and if we know what our needs are. Oh, it's good. Now let's actually get stuck into it. So, common red flags in teenage athletes. Now, this is a very broad. We work with a lot of teenage athletes here across a multitude of sports, and usually we tend to see it more in specific sports. So usually it's more individual sports, when there's like track and field, cycling, swimming, gymnastics, cheer and dance. Those are the sports we tend to see a lot of issues with. Even with team sports as well, we see it to some degree as well. But what are some of those common red flags that we tend to see when it comes to, like, you see a few youth athletes when they're coming through the door? What are the things you kind of keep an ear out or an eye out for? One of the main big things that I see in teen athletes is they're just saying they're feeling really tired. So it might come out of the blue, or it might be something that's really subtle and develop over time. Maybe they're really tired before their training sessions, or straight after their training sessions, they're just not feeling energized, or even throughout, they might be yawning or just not able to perform as well. They might be feeling like they're just not concentrating at school. So maybe during their training sessions, they're able to get through, but during school time, they're just, again, yawning, really tired, not connecting, not concentrating. They're sort of the main things that I see in youth athletes in particular. Yeah, and I think from my perspective is there energy input matching the output? Yeah. And not always. So the most common thing I do see is that energy input, especially around those training sessions, is not meeting the needs. Sometimes it's not a case of what they're eating or how much they're eating, but actually other factors coming in. So things like gut issues I do see sometimes. So they might say that they feel really
sick in the mornings, especially for some of the girls, or they might be stressed. So stress and mental health is another major factor that I see. So they might be feeling a little bit anxious or a little bit nervous around their training sessions or around school. And that can also impact how well we're actually utilizing that energy for our performance.
So how does stress affect that then?
So basically, one of the main things I see stress is that when we're really, really stressed, like I was saying, they might feel nauseous or sick in the morning. So maybe they're not eating before a training session or before school. The other thing that can happen is that we're not digesting and absorbing our nutrients as effectively. So what happens is that when stress occurs, our body ends up sort of reducing the availability of these digestive enzymes and things to break down our food and absorb our food effectively. So we might have a youth athlete that is eating really well, but they're really tired, they're really stressed all the time, and that's because they're actually not absorbing those nutrients needed for proper functioning.
Yep, and I think from the stress perspective, obviously we see a reduction in performance, and then it just becomes almost like the hamster wheel just keeps turning over.
Yeah.
And then how would you go about potentially creating an intervention for this individual? Like, where would you start? So they came in the door,
yeah.
Mum's like, little Sally, she's, tired, fatigued from training, competition. She performed well below what she anticipated or where she was projected to.
Yeah.
In the last competition a couple of months ago, how would you start to work with that type of individual?
So I would ask questions around their sleep, their stress levels, other factors that are coming in. I would look obviously at their diet, what are they eating? Are they enjoying what they're eating? Making sure they're actually meeting their needs. And then if they were meeting their needs, but we found they had a lot of stress around school or a lot of new anxiety around school or around their training, that's where we might look at bringing in like a psychologist or something else to make sure that they're really supported depending on why they might be feeling quite stressed.
Yep.
But also we want to look at, are there any nutrient deficiencies that might be contributing to that stress? Which is where we would look at some testing or something along those lines as well.
Yeah, and how often are you saying to the parents, like, all right, let's get a full blood panel done to see where the gaps are?
So generally every year, ideally.
Yep.
And that goes for both teens or youth athletes, but also adults as well. I like to do sort of yearly preventative blood testing because we can't always see how well we're actually digesting and absorbing our nutrients. So especially if we run, a dietary analysis, then diet actually looks pretty good, which is actually something I do commonly see where diet looks pretty good, but there's other factors that might be influencing how well the child or teen or adult is actually digesting and absorbing those nutrients, like I was saying before.
Yep.
And that's where blood tests can become a really powerful tool actually to show us how well those things are being utilized and where the gaps might be.
Okay, so you've identified they're eating generally well, the timing's pretty good, okay, and then for whatever reason they're still struggling, you bring in the psychologist, and then what are you doing from your role or your perspective in order to best support the individual moving forward?
Yeah, so that's where we're looking at analyzing those blood tests. So I'm looking at optimal ranges. So I actually, as a clinical nutritionist, have slightly different reference ranges to what we have here in Australia.
Pause on that for a second. Now, when I go to the GP, if I go to the GP to get a blood test, I want to be at like peak for every metric that's possible, right? And I know the standards tend to change every several years or so, right? So why do we need to look at it from a GP will look at their general health, and how does that compare to like an athlete, in terms of their standards?
Yeah, well, we want our athletes to be working at peak performance. When we look at the reference ranges on blood tests, we're looking at, are they diseased? Are they at the point where they're actually in a diseased state or a disordered state, not necessarily peak performance and optimal performance. So that's why if we're just focusing on the reference ranges, which by the way, sometimes I do see them being, 1 or 2 points out of that lower end of the range for something. And a lot of the doctors are saying it's fine, but we're not optimally performing because it's at the lower end of that range. So that's where a nutritionist can come in and say, hey, this particular range, while it's in the normal reference range, it's actually not in our optimal reference ranges for what we actually want.
Because we want the optimal reference ranges in order to meet the physical demands.
Exactly, yeah. And that's slightly different for everybody. So we have quite a wide range. And if we see all the signs and symptoms and they're just meeting those needs in terms of looking at those reference ranges, we think probably we need to support that area.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But part of the reason why you said from a preventative perspective, we get it done on a yearly basis because you can actually see the general trend, or is there a change that's occurred, from, a 12-year-old to a 14-year-old, and especially for girls, that can be quite a different shift because of the physiological changes that are occurring.
Yes. And also we don't know from one particular blood test what's going on in terms of over time, because it's a snapshot in time. So it's sort of around that particular time frame. So we might actually do it a little bit sooner if there's a lot going on. We might do it in sort of 3 to 6 months' time if there are some nutritional deficiencies, just to then track and make sure it's going in the right direction.
If you're getting value from the Inner Athlete podcast, make sure you like, subscribe, and leave a review. It helps more parents and young athletes find the right guidance and keeps this podcast growing. Back to the show.
I guess inflammation is obviously a big one, right? So whether it's localized or systemic, how do you take that into consideration? So the cortisol levels are a little bit higher than normal, which is read on the blood test. Iron status is a lot lower. And then how do you start to help the individual if they are experiencing inflammation or stiff or sore joints from that perspective?
Yeah, again, it just depends on sort of why. So I could talk about what are you doing in terms of fueling around training to make sure that they're getting in those nutrients before and after, making sure they're staying hydrated. Again, making sure that across the day their food choices are adequate to support recovery, but then looking like you would look at what are the actual habits that they're doing to support recovery as well. So it's not just about what we do in training, but actually what we do in recovery that can make a difference. How are they managing their stress? Are they having fun? Are they making time for fun and things like that as well?
Yeah, to help to bring the cortisol levels down. Yeah. There was a podcast I listened to many years ago. So, Tom Bilyeu? I think he's the Quest Nutrition owner.
Oh, yeah, I can't
his
remember
wife.
his name. Yeah.
His wife.
Yeah.
And she spoke about that she would never eat breakfast. It's because she woke up in a very highly strung, stressed out state. Yeah. And then she mentioned she does 15 to 20 minutes of meditation, and then she was actually able to eat. And obviously, if we're in a stressed out state, where does our blood go? Mm-hmm. To the working tissue or to our muscles, right? Or to our peripherals. They're not going to be going to our, digestive tract in order to be like, oh, I feel hungry now. It's not going to happen. Yeah. So she started doing meditation, and then she was actually able to actually have breakfast. Yeah. In the morning. So obviously the environment, from more of a strength and conditioning perspective, it's the environment that you put your child in. Are they actually calm and relaxed?
Yes. And it's one of the biggest things that I see is that mornings, especially school mornings, can be chaos for families. It's a big rush. We're trying to get everyone out the door. It can be really stressful for the kids or teens as well. And so even if they are just about before they're about to eat breakfast, it doesn't have to be meditation, but if everyone's feeling a little bit stressed and maybe they feel like they're not digesting as well, taking 5 deep breaths. So 5 deep belly breaths. So where your diaphragm is just below the rib cage. If they pop their hands there and just take 5 nice deep slow breaths in and sort of fill up their hands, they pop their hands there, that can actually even just help to sort of bring the blood flow back to the digestive system before they start eating, so that they get a lot more of those nutrients from their foods that they're eating, as reduce those stress levels a little bit.
And the blood flow will actually be around the digestive tract in that case. The other one you can do is put your legs up against the wall, something like that, and just breathe normally, because the way the pelvis is now situated, it makes it a lot easier to get those deep belly breaths as well.
And that one's great for post-training before dinner sort of situation.
Return you back to that, that parasympathetic state. For those that don't know what parasympathetic state is, it's more just that rest and digest. So we have fight, flight, freeze, which is more the anxiety-driven state. Now, as a strength and conditioning coach, you actually you don't want to be in that state for very long whatsoever. It's very, think of a saber-toothed tiger, you run. Essentially, right? But the problem with the world stresses, I mentioned this on so many different episodes of the podcast, is when we're in an anxiety-driven state, we're not going to feel hungry.
No, we're not going to feel hungry. Or some people feel more hungry, and then they overeat, which puts a lot of pressure on a digestive system.
And what foods do they normally eat?
Yes, exactly. So might not choose certain foods that are actually supporting that recovery and actually supporting training as best as it possibly can. And then it might cause more of those digestive issues there as well, which can impact performance, but also make the anxiety or stress a little bit worse. So it heightens everything up. Yeah.
And it keeps you in that perpetual cycle.
Yeah.
As well. We've mentioned obviously blood tests. Is there any other tests that you might consider? Actually, I'll go back one question.
Yeah.
From the blood test perspective, like what are the three key things if parents want to become more educated in this space when they get their sons or daughters' test results back? Like what would be the three key metrics that you would want to see, and then you'd be able to start to prescribe, or you actually the parents may need to get further support moving forward.
In terms of which blood test to do?
In terms of like, if we're looking at like iron, magnesium, which ones are we looking
There's
at?
probably more than three, to be honest. I've got about five.
We'll go 5 then.
Iron is the biggest one that I see because it's the one that impacts how well we're actually transporting oxygen around the body. So especially if your child or teen is just feeling really, really tired and not recovering or feeling quite breathless during training, always go iron, and full iron studies, not just ferritin, because sometimes they'll just do ferritin, which is our iron storage, but that doesn't tell us how well iron's being used around the body. So if we go full iron studies, B12 and folate are probably the other two big ones involved in energy production that I see that's associated with digestion and absorption of certain foods. And then vitamin D is another one, because vitamin D is actually very, very common, a deficiency here in Australia, surprisingly. We're meant to get it from the sun, but then sometimes there can be some genetic factors, meaning that they're not actually able to use that vitamin D effectively that we're transforming from the sun. And then we just want a full blood count, and electrolytes, probably the other two. So electrolytes show us about that electrolyte balance, so their hydration levels and sort of recovery, and that includes magnesium, often, and calcium as well in that. And then full blood count just shows us about things like is there some immune system issues and inflammation? Have they got enough of that oxygen being transported around the body?
And then the blood cell count, that includes platelets, white blood cells.
Platelets, white blood cells. Yeah, all of that sort of stuff.
Okay,
as
cool.
Well.
And obviously that is a sign of inflammation.
Yeah. So we can see some pretty big things and patterns across there. And if there's anything in there that needs further investigation, then we can go back and do some more investigations after that. But iron, B12, folate, electrolytes, vitamin D, and full blood count are my top ones.
Cool. All right. Segue into the next topic. So we're talking about hormonal differences. Obviously, blood tests obviously help to differentiate what hormones are high, what hormones we're deficient. Obviously, we have two specific types of hormones. But I can't remember exactly. I think it was one that require fat, and you have your long-lasting hormones, and then you have like your fast-acting hormones specifically. But I want to talk a little bit more about the difference between boys and girls, and like the different hormones. So what hormone? We obviously know testosterone and estrogen is obviously different, right, between the boys and girls. But if we take a blood test for a boy and they're showing relatively low levels of testosterone, what potential issues may they have, and then what potential things can you do to help to improve that? Yeah,
I wouldn't necessarily test a teen for hormones specifically, only because it can actually take a few years for those hormones to regulate properly. However, if they were showing signs of low testosterone, again, coming back to stress, is the child or teen quite stressed? Obviously making sure that they've gone through puberty, or that they're going through puberty, because we're not producing that much testosterone until that point anyway. So up until puberty, the needs of kids are pretty similar in terms of boys versus girls. And then going through puberty and after puberty, they change a little bit. So a boy who might have low testosterone might also be really stressed. They might also have quite low zinc levels, is one of the other main things that I do see. And so just looking at all those environmental factors, are they eating enough is one of the other main things, because if they're not eating enough, sometimes that can impact their testosterone levels. And then what we would probably see from a performance perspective is that they were struggling to put on muscle or gain muscle. They would be feeling really, really tired, and they might be feeling quite irritable as well. And those are very general symptoms. So it's not always just testosterone. But if they are experiencing any of those things, that's where blood testing can kind of come into play. And obviously looking at their lifestyle and their overall diet quality as well. And then for girls, obviously when we go through puberty and we start getting periods coming into play, we've got to really think about iron, because we are losing a lot more iron when we do menstruate. And that's one of the main reasons why I see girls end up being a bit iron deficient, is because that they're menstruating. We've also got to think about that girls who have gone through puberty are much more sensitive to stress. more sensitive to stress than boys generally as well. So if they've
got to do with testosterone improves the ability to withstand or be able to recover?
It's a little bit, but it's also just from a biological perspective. If we think about why we menstruate, it's actually because, and teens are not thinking about this, but it's fertility. So it's to make a baby. We're not thinking about that at that age.
And you want to be at a low stress state.
We want to be in a low stress state. Otherwise, if the body experiences stress, it thinks we're not in a position to actually make a baby right now. We're going to try and conserve as much energy as possible. And what it will do is it will actually reduce those production of estrogen and progesterone in order to divert those resources to other things.
Yep.
So girls tend to be a little bit more sensitive to stress, and that's quite a normal thing, but we've got to think about that when we're trying to support our teens as well.
That's a wrap for part 1 of this episode on the Inner Athlete podcast. We've covered some incredible insights today, but there's still so much more to come. Make sure to tune in to part 2 for the rest of the conversation. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, give us a like, and share it with your network to help us reach even more listeners like you. Thanks for joining me, and I'll catch you in part 2.